In January, the world was struck by the images of a deadly mining dam collapse in Brazil. More than 250 people were killed when a river of destructive waste poured down on the town of Brumadinho. Brazilian mining giant Vale agreed to pay $107 million in damages to compensate victims and their families. Venezuela's political crisis took a turn when a 35-year-old Venezuelan politician named Juan Guaidó declared himself interim president until free and fair elections could be held in economically crippled Venezuela.
Juro. Asumir formalmente las competencias.
I swear to assume all the powers of the national executive as the interim president of Venezuela.
Como el presidente encargado de Venezuela.
But despite backing from more than 50 countries, including the United States, a year on, and it is President Nicolás Maduro who remains in control. Venezuela, in the meantime, is challenging Syria as the world's largest refugee crisis. 4.7 million Venezuelans have left the country since 2015, and according to the United Nations, that number could reach 6.5 million in 2020.
Com vocês, a maior artilheira da história da seleção brasileira, Marta.
In June, a bright spot for women's sports and a cause for celebration, as Brazil's national women's football team captain Marta Vieira da Silva scored her 17th goal in World Cup play, more than any other woman or man had ever done before.
No traicionada.
Colombia's struggle to implement the 2016 peace deal with FARC rebels became even more difficult in August, when former FARC leader Iván Márquez called on followers to take up arms again. He said the government had betrayed the agreement. The world responded with outrage to Brazil's environmental policies when the Amazon rainforest burned at an alarming and record-setting rate this year, with much of the criticism directed at the country's far-right president, Jair Bolsonaro. But Bolsonaro joined a pact by 7 Amazon rainforest countries in all to better protect the world's largest tropical rainforest. The headlines continued in Brazil when former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was released from prison after a year and a half behind bars. The two-term president was serving a 12-year prison sentence for corruption and money laundering. His November release came after Brazil's Supreme Court ruled that defendants can remain free until all appeals are exhausted. Also in November, Havana, Cuba celebrated the 500th anniversary of its founding, culminating with a grand fireworks display. Thousands of residents and tourists gathered to take it in along the storied Malecón Boulevard. And by fall, a wave of protests had spread across Latin America. In Ecuador, President Lenín Moreno's austerity measures that included fuel subsidy cuts led to weeks of violent protests. A deal was finally struck with indigenous leaders that dropped plans to raise gas prices. Massive protests engulfed controversial elections in Bolivia. President Evo Morales won a 4th consecutive term amid accusations of electoral fraud. Prosecutors in Bolivia issued an arrest warrant, while Morales now lives in exile in Argentina, and the country plans new elections. A 4% rise in metro prices was the spark that ignited months of social unrest in Chile. At least 26 people have been killed, hundreds injured, and thousands detained since the unrest began in October, with mass demonstrations demanding social reforms and changes in the constitution. Colombia's anti-government movement began with a national workers' strike in November. As protests continue, talks with the government have yet to make headway, leaving strikers likely to take their list of grievances into the new year. The list of Latin American countries in protest this year included Puerto Rico, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Brazil. While each of them with their own unique demands, all of them are echoing a common sentiment: the need for citizens to be heard by their leaders. Michelle Begue, CGTN, Bogotá, Colombia.